And so, here is my return from another long absence to review one of the most anticipated films of the last 2 years. But before I do that, I should summarize my feelings toward the previous Marvel films. Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 were both very good movies, with a number of flaws, while Captain America the Winter Soldier ranks as one of the best Marvel movies yet made as far as I'm concerned. And given how I felt about the first Captain America, that is a huge improvement. And now for this movie, The Age of Ultron. It's a film which tries to show the consequences of revenge, fear, and paranoia. The Avengers are forced to deal with a serious threat to their world, which they themselves create. Meanwhile, the aforementioned threat teams up with a pair of twins, whose plans for revenge don't go the way they initially plan. The twins are played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen. They're welcome additions to the more familiar cast, and if you haven't seen the Iron Man movies, they provide a very unique and interesting view towards the Avengers. Meanwhile, James Spader voices Ultron, the AI villain. There's also Claudia Kim as Dr. Cho, and a number of surprising cameos throughout the film. Not least of which is Andy Serkis, in what is basically a pointless character, though I've heard he'll be important in a later movie coming up. First of all, let's talk about the things that work best in this movie. Spader as Ultron made for a villain that was in equal parts funny and threatening throughout the film. The relationship between Black Widow and Bruce Banner is a great development for the two of them, and the motivations for their actions make a lot of sense. For most of her life, Black Widow has been surrounded by warriors and killers and heroes, and she falls for the one man who could defeat them all, yet fears doing so. Meanwhile, Banner is terrified of what being the Hulk would do to a significant other, and their conversations for the most part make a lot of sense. Also, the action scenes were very well filmed, especially the opening scene and the big climactic fight. Especially that certain moment when the heroes stand together in one place and just kick ass. And that aside, it was also nice to see a shift in the Avengers' goals near the end of the film, when the stakes were more about saving the many civilians milling around in the middle of a war zone. It should be what the Avengers do more often. They should not just be interested in defeating the bad guy, they should also be interested in saving people. That said, there's a few things in this film that really didn't sit well with me. For all the focus on saving civilians at the climax of the film, there are a lot of moments prior to that where people were clearly massacred, and no further mention is made of it. Another thing that got my attention was how Tony Stark seems to have forgotten his character arc in Iron Man 3. There's no mention of it at all. And on that note, Tony makes a pretty tasteless comment about installing prima nocta for his own benefit, which basically means that Tony is joking about rape. On the subject of the twins, I thought it was a bit condescending how much focus the filmmakers put on the girl half of the twins' fear of going into conflict, while the boy has absolutely no problem getting into a fight. And in fact sees his sister as someone who needs to be constantly protected and saved. And the movie never really balances that out in the opposite direction. Another part is the assumption by Black Widow that a certain handicap she has makes her a monster equivalent to the Incredible Hulk. I mean, the origin of this handicap is sickening, and it shouldn't happen to anyone. But really, it wasn't her fault. So having her blame herself so strongly even now was just unsettling. I guess that was the point, but the characters never once try to correct this belief and explain to her how she shouldn't feel so alienated by this. And that ties into another problem the movie has. While a lot of interesting ideas are brought up, there's never quite time given to really examine them. And as for what I'll only refer to as the vision in the later part of the film, I don't really know how I feel about this addition. It comes out of left field, and the reactions that the characters have are a bit understated, But that said, I don't really have that much problem with the vision itself. And that's about as far as I'll go on the matter. All in all, this is a fairly middling film in the Marvel franchise. Based on what I've heard, it seems to have polarized audiences immensely, and I can understand why. There's a lot to like or dislike depending on what you expected. But in my humble opinion, there's enough to like about this film to warrant at least one viewing.